We've heard a lot during the course of today about digital transformation. What does digital transformation mean? Well, more or less it's a different definition depending on who you are and what you want to achieve. I'm going to take a dive into one very specific element of digital transformation around the Internet of Things, and within that, specifically around the use of that technology for sustainability. Really, when we think about digital transformation, it's about a set of different technologies that are applied for one of what would have been historically three reasons. It would have been make money, it would have been save money, which is particularly relevant for government and any public sector organisation, or it's stay out of jail, compliance with a given regulation. But increasingly, we also see a fourth element to it, and that fourth element is around sustainability, the green agenda, hitting sustainable development goals, whether they're formal ones as are set out by the United Nations in their SDGs, or less formal ones in terms of organisations' ESG goals that they establish, or governmental even. So I want to dive down into that particular area. A little bit of an introduction of who we are and what we do first off. We're a technology research and consulting firm. What we do is we seek to understand a set of emerging new technologies that we've put under this handy umbrella term of digital transformations. That includes things like the Internet of Things, includes artificial intelligence, edge computing, blockchain, a whole host of other technology areas. Now, I realise that's probably wildly different from other organisations' definitions of what digital transformation might involve, but that's ours and that's what we do with it. So we help technology adopters, whether that be government or enterprise. We help technology vendors, we help regulators and various government organisations on understanding, okay, if you've got all these new technologies coming through, what are the implications? How do I need to adapt my organisation? How do I need to adapt what we do in order to reflect that new technology environment? And we work with a set of technology vendors, the great and the good of the technology industry, to help them work their way through this changing technology landscape. And one of the big things that we've been doing in recent years is looking at sustainability, looking at how you use all of these new emerging technologies to better hit the Sustainable Development Goals, or better to reduce things like CO2 emissions, reduce power consumption, but also things like water consumption, and a variety of other areas around that, and also additionally into some of the other, whether they be societal or governmental elements. So, little reminder on what the UN Sustainability Goals or Sustainable Development Goals look like. There are 17 of them. They span a whole range of different areas, from eliminating poverty and reducing hunger, through to economic things like good jobs and economic growth and innovation and infrastructure, all of which are aimed at helping government, companies, maybe even individuals, to better understand how they can work to provide essentially a better world. And increasingly, organisations look at their own operations and their activities in the context of how well they're acting to meet these Sustainable Development Goals. And within the research that we've been doing, we looked at all of these technology areas that we look at, which are highlighted on this chart, to understand, okay, well, if you were to implement each of these, make use of these technologies, then how might you then be achieving these Sustainable Development Goals? Let me explain this one a little bit. So on the left-hand side, what we have is a set of enabling technology areas. Internet of Things being a very significant one that's very close to my heart, because that's really where I've been working for the last 10 or 15 years. But also things around, I mentioned artificial intelligence. Can we use AI to better address environmental related factors? So we have these technologies. We also, on the right-hand side, have a set of use cases. And this might be everything from using fleet management to reduce your fuel consumption as a distribution company, through to all sorts of things related to AI, more efficiently addressing users and the environment with chatbots or optimization of business planning or any number of different approaches. And all of that gets then pushed into the center and is a way that organizations within, well, pretty much every size of organization within every sector can make use of these technologies to change their processes, to adapt how they act in order to be more, well, either make money or save money or stay out of jail or be more environmentally friendly. And I want to focus specifically on that environmentally friendly element today, as you can probably have guessed from what I've been talking about. So one of the things that we've done is we've dug into, okay, well, if we look at each one of these different use cases, using each one of these different forms of technology, what kind of savings can you achieve? What kind of benefit can you derive for the economy? And we've broken that down really into a few areas, one being energy saving. And we've calculated that by using these various different use cases, I'll talk a little bit about the individual use cases in a moment, but collectively using these various use cases, there's something like a 5 petawatt hours of energy saving by 2030. Now, I'm pretty sure if you're anything like me, you won't be able to visualize in any way what 5 petawatt hours of energy looks like. But to put it into context, the ICT sector today generates globally something like 8 petawatt hours. So that's including all cloud computing or enterprise ICT usage. You combine all that together, you get 8 petawatt hours. So it's eliminating something like 60% or the equivalent of 60% of that energy being used. And that's partly in terms of reduced electricity consumption through things like smart buildings or smart cities, a variety of different use cases. Again, I'll come on to talk about some of the specifics in just a moment. There's also the opportunity for reducing water consumption. Water, obviously, an increasingly scarce resource, and through particularly the use of smart agriculture solutions, the water resources that we have can be much more effectively used. So through the use of these various different technology approaches, specifically, well, in fact, across all of these digital transformation technologies that we talk about, but particularly IoT, we can see a 230 billion cubic meters worth of water reduction by 2030. So a huge, huge amount. Not only that, but we're also seeing a reduction in CO2 emissions, a gigaton of CO2 emissions by 2030 by the use of these various different technologies. And what we've done, what I'm showing on the chart on the left-hand side, is the benefits that derive from all of these various different technologies. I'm going to be delving more into IoT, but this includes the impact of AI and various others. And mostly that's overwhelmingly positive. We do have one which is rather negative, and that's in the form of blockchain or distributed ledger. The Bitcoin mining and everything associated with that tends to have a negative environmental impact. But overall, across the dozen technology areas that we look at, there is an overwhelmingly positive impact. The question is, of course, right, that's very interesting in the general perspective, but what about delving into more specific? And we've identified what we've referred to as the clean dozen technology areas or adoption areas. Some of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the movie The Dirty Dozen. Well, this is the clean dozen. These are the technology areas that will help to reduce CO2 emissions, reduce energy consumption, reduce water consumption, and therefore help with driving environmental benefits. Top of the pile of those relates to smart buildings. So things like having more efficient and effective heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, more effective lighting systems. I'll talk about those in a moment. Next one down, fleet operations. This is to do with making a more efficient route planning and driver behavior monitoring to make sure that the fleet vehicles are making much less use of fuel, essentially. Getting more for less and just producing more efficient driver behavior and routing. Smart grid is another area. There are tremendous losses associated with electricity grids around the world. And the application of smart grid technology to be able to better understand the ways in which electricity losses are happening, to minimize those losses, whether that be within the grid or whether that be with smart meter deployments, that has a significant impact. So what I'm showing across the top of this chart is CO2 impact. We look at the impact in terms of hydrocarbon fuel, in terms of electricity, in terms of water consumption. Some other ESGs, so environmental, social, and governance impacts. So those might be things like just improvement in quality of life, not necessarily linked to the environment, but linked to if you can get your your traffic lights to be more efficient, people are sitting in traffic jams for less time. That's a personal benefit to the driver over and above the environmental impact that it might have. And probably one of the critical things to be aware of within this, and we've included this within all of the studies that we do, is that there is also a business impact of all of these things, a financial element to it. There is a wonderful overlap between the fact that for most of these technology deployments, most of these use case deployments, as well as there being a positive environmental impact, there is also a positive business impact. I talked about smart buildings and more efficient HVAC systems. I talked about fleet management, using less fuel. Well, all of those things then translate also into reduced spend, something which in many countries has become increasingly important with rising fuel costs and rising electricity costs. So we think of these things in the round. Now, that's across the whole of digital transformation, taking account of all of those technology areas. One of the things we also did is, obviously, we broke down that into each of the individual technology areas to think about, okay, well, what's going to have the most significant impact? Where can we get the greatest savings? And the greatest savings associated with all of these things are in the use of the Internet of Things. Now, that obviously raises another question of how do you define the Internet of Things? Well, we have a very complicated definition of it, or what's included and excluded, but essentially it's an umbrella term which covers the monitoring, management, control of remote devices that are something other than a phone or a tablet or a PC, but are put there in order to manage and control a remote asset, something in the physical world. Now, organizations that are deploying this stuff generally don't think of themselves as deploying IoT. They think about themselves as putting in place a fleet management solution or rolling out a smart metering program. But we collectively consider this all to be the Internet of Things. And as a result of it being that place where the real world interacts with the IT world, this is where the vast, vast majority of savings, those sustainability benefits, are realized, because that's where all the electricity is consumed, or the vast majority of electricity is consumed, where the vast majority of hydrocarbon fuels are consumed, if not all, where water consumption can be influenced. And so it's those IoT applications that can have that greatest impact on sustainability. So the chart I'm showing here is electricity saved, fuel saved, and electricity consumed, i.e. the negative aspect of deploying IoT, and as a result, what the net benefit associated with it is. So something like 5 petawatt hours. That's very similar to the total figure for all of digital transformation that I showed earlier, because something like 99% of the savings associated with all of these digital transformation technologies are realized within the Internet of Things. And that includes things like smart grid and HVAC systems and fleet management and road traffic monitoring and so forth. So what did we do? Well, the way to really get into what the impact is to look at a granular level at each of the various different use cases, the various applications. And we have a very granular segmentation of what's included under this IoT umbrella. That will be way too small for anybody to read, I'm sure, but there's a version of this up on our website, or if anybody wants to side to that, then do let me know. But for each of those, we then looked at the sustainability impact per application: electricity, hydrocarbon fuel, water, CO2. Now, I mentioned that there was a negative element to it as well, as in there's a cost associated with deploying all of these things. You have to make that fleet management device. You have to make that monitoring device for HVAC systems and so on. So we take a life cycle perspective on this concept of sustainability. We look both at the operation, which is the main thing that we tend to focus on. Okay, how much savings can there be from running a connected HVAC system or a connected lighting system, which makes sure that when there's no one in this room, the lights will turn out, rather than having them run all night and therefore wasting electricity. So the vast majority sits within that operation element. But there's also manufacturing. You have to produce that lighting system. You have to distribute it. So you have to stick it on a lorry and send it somewhere. And finally, you have to end of life. You have this residual set of electronics equipment that has to be dealt with, has to be removed from the environment. The e-waste needs to be dealt with. So we think about all of these things in the whole. And when we dig into this, what we find is that the vast majority of these savings are associated with the enterprise. For the reason that I mentioned about there's a wonderful overlap between the savings associated with the economic benefit, the financial benefit associated with deploying these technologies, and the environmental benefit. Well, that manifests itself here. If you're an enterprise, most of these sustainability benefits you'll be gaining from doing something that's also saving money. On the consumer side of things, well, this tends to be adding new features. It doesn't generally result in reducing that kind of environmental footprint, although it does to a certain extent. So it's shown there. So overall, I mentioned that we have these dozen technology areas or dozen application areas that are the ones that have the really positive impact from all of these technology areas. Well, as I'm showing there, 90-something% of each one of these areas about fuel, around water, electricity consumption, CO2, and so forth. Most of that is as a result of the Internet of Things. And these are actually relatively mature now. This isn't cutting-edge, amazing new technology these days. Having a solution which will, as I mentioned, switch off the lights in this room when there are no people in there, it's pretty well established. Having a connected heating, ventilation, air conditioning system to optimize for when there are people in a room or depending on the time of day is, again, pretty well established. So there are a set of quite mature technologies which are there and ready to be deployed, but there is, in most organizations, something of an inertia about getting these things rolled out. So it's always something of a slow slow process, should we say. Just want to talk then through a few examples of where companies, governments, various other organizations have deployed IoT-related solutions in order to save money and have these environmental benefits. I mentioned earlier that this idea of smart buildings is probably the number one impact. 27% of energy-related carbon emissions globally are generated by buildings. And we've calculated that smart building management systems, that might be related to, well, predominantly it's related to heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and lighting, those kinds of schemes, can cut electricity consumption by 10 to 20%. So if we would see full deployment across every building, you're looking at something like potentially a 5% saving in global electricity consumption, or rather the carbon emissions associated with that. Significant numbers, I'm sure you can agree. And to give an example, there's a company called Italian who saw an 84% saving. This is for building lighting. And that was as a result of using just more efficient lighting. Great, okay, not necessarily a connected thing, but they also saw another 1/3 saving as a result of having it as a connected system. So significant savings associated with that. On the right-hand side, what I'm showing is some smart cities-related use cases. Street lighting being quite a considerable drain on electricity consumption in many markets. Depends on how dark it gets, shall we say. But it can consume between 1% and 3% of electricity within a country. And using smart street lighting can reduce consumption by up to 40%. And then we have other solutions like parking space monitoring, which can reduce idling time and driving time for looking for parking spaces by 30 to 40%. And there's another alternative one. The city of Pittsburgh has put in a connected connected traffic light system. And there they've reduced travel time by 26%, according to their calculations, 40% less wait time, 21% reduction in emissions as a result of doing those. So some quite significant benefits associated with smart cities. The next couple, fleet management and supply chain, these two go rather well together, and they're often adopted in parallel. But fleet management specifically is related to the distribution of goods. Increasingly important. Over the COVID period, we saw in many countries a shift towards much more online purchases, and therefore much more distribution as a result, and probably less, in fact almost certainly less efficient distribution. And the transportation industry accounts for, as we can see up on there, 37% of carbon emissions, and greater than 30% of it created by vehicle fleets. So if you can reduce that consumption by a bit more efficient transportation approaches, then you can reduce fuel consumption by 10 to 20%, 15% on average, and possibly as far up as 25%. And in fact, there was a Brazilian company called ITA Transportes who saw a carbon reduction of 18% and a cost reduction of 40% as a result of doing these systems. So some significant savings there. And on the supply chain issue, just more efficient, what we're talking about there is more efficient logistics handling, warehouse management, just more efficient programs associated with making sure that supply chain infrastructure runs in a more efficient manner. And there was an example from American Apparel in the US, and as a result of the supply chain optimization programs that they ran, they were able to reduce their inventory by 20%, reduce their store sizes by 10%, so requiring less square footage of stores, and as a result, significant savings, both in terms of cost savings and in terms of environmental savings. And the final couple that I wanted to talk about, smart grid and smart agriculture. Smart grid, really the most significant deployments within a smart grid context are smart metering rollouts. And we tend to see that electricity consumption reduces by 3 to 5% as a result of deploying smart meters, just by virtue of changing patterns of user behavior. because they see how much electricity they're using and they adjust their behavior accordingly. So that's 3 to 5% of all, well, domestic, residential, and business usage, same sort of dynamic. In fact, across businesses, it's even greater, 10 to 12%, probably because the savings are that bit greater, and also you've got somebody employed to watch this stuff. So significant changes there, or significant benefits associated with that. Smart agriculture. Now, agriculture tends to be more about water savings rather than fuel savings. Agriculture is the largest consumer of freshwater reserves in any country, and 50% of that water is that's used in irrigation is wasted. And irrigation management systems, the use of IoT for monitoring and management of irrigation, can reduce water consumption by 25 to 30%, knocking out a significant chunk of that wasted water usage. And yeah, so that's just a few examples of across each of those areas, the amount of savings that can be made as a result of making use within a given country of the various opportunities within IoT. So IoT isn't just this theoretical concept. It isn't just this, nice to have technology area that a lot of people like me are rattling on about. It has significant benefits across energy usage, water consumption, carbon dioxide emissions, all of these various different elements. So how does that map onto, I talked at the start about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and I've talked about all of these various different adoption areas like smart cities and smart buildings and fleet management and so on. So how does that map onto those SDGs? Well, it maps very well onto some, not perhaps quite so well onto others. So anything related to the environment tends to be very, very well represented. So the second bar down is good health and well-being. And you've got all sorts of use cases that will help with good health and well-being. Anything that reduces CO2 emissions will help with helps with good wealth as well, but good health and well-being. You've got clean water and sanitation, so reducing water consumption, or the rollout of smart water metering and smart water grid use cases can help with improving that. You have down at number 9, most obviously, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. If these deployments are based on anything, they're based on improving the use of technology and improvement of the economy and society by use of new innovative technologies. And climate action, again down there at number 13. All of these areas, quite specifically, are tremendously useful for acting on the environment, for reducing CO2 consumption, reducing energy consumption, all of these various different benefits. So in terms of meeting SDGs, does it meet all of them? Does IoT help to meet all of them? No. Does it go a tremendous way towards helping to meet a substantial number of them? Absolutely it does. That was what I wanted to talk about IoT. Just a quick note. There's a lot of free resources available on our website. If anybody's interested, go check it out. You can sign up for our essential free level of service where you can get access to some of these reports and so on. And my contact details are here if anybody would like to know more. Yes?